Okay, so it looks like most of the people I can see you have worked with in Viva already. So in that case, I'll go through quite quickly what I'm just going to be focusing on today. I mean, if you've worked with Viva, you'll know that it does a huge amount. So to work out what to focus on for an hour-and-a-half workshop, I'm going to be focusing on predominantly the kind of the way to work with the media data and kind of the richness of data that you can get, because sometimes we get tempted just to work with text because that's what we're most familiar with. Sometimes it is text we're working with, in which case that's absolutely fine. But other times when we're doing more in-depth research and we have maybe some recordings of interviews or focus groups, and you can actually work with that and really get the depth out of that. So I'll just do a quick introductory few slides just to start off with, and then I'm going to go into NVivo Live, and I'm going to talk through some of the sections so that you have a chance to really see how things work. And I'm also going to go a bit faster. I'm going to do a bit of a demonstration of some limited amount of time. Unfortunately, I can't show you everything because it would take 2 days. We've got an hour and a half. So I will just going to minimize. I'd love to see your faces, but I also need to see my screen. So most of you sounds like you know what NVivo is. So it's a world-leading qualitative analysis software. You can work with a wide variety of data. You can work with any methodology, and it's used in a number of contexts. I put these in because I wasn't sure people were coming to NVivo for the first time. So it helps you manage, access, and analyze qualitative data. It allows you to capture your thoughts and interpretations. It has got, we looked at this yesterday, if any of you at the presentation yesterday, I was focusing on some of the automated processes, especially if you're working with large amounts of text data. NVivo can really help you kind of scan through and really go in and get a broad view, but also go in depth in that way. It also allows you to explore and visualize data. However, as those of you who work with it know, it does not do the analysis. It doesn't give you the answers. It's up to us as researchers to really think about and analyze our own data. And it does work with a wide variety of data. So you can work with text, with PDF. You can also work with audio recording, video, images, also social media and surveys. So what all those different types, which to me is the joy of qualitative research, is that we can use all these different types of data. We can bring them together. We can really go deep and we can really understand what's going on with the data, with often the people we're interviewing, the people we're talking to. So this ability to bring in those different types, and I'm going to be talking today, as I mentioned, about focusing on the media, on why might you consider working with media data when traditionally we haven't. Often when I'm doing workshops, people talk about they've done interviews, but they've gone down a traditional route of just transcribing. They've been transcribing and just working with text. But now we have options. Now we have a way that you can work with those recordings and you can get that data that words don't convey. The statistics that I've heard are between 7 and 9% of communication is the words themselves, which means over 90% of communication is non-verbal. And to me, that's huge. So when we transcribe, when we just work with text, we lose a huge amount of data, a huge amount of richness of that data that we can actually capture and we can go back to and we can actually work with. So we're going to be looking at, so working with audios, working with videos. I will cover working with text as well, if anyone is new to NVivo, just so you can see how all this comes together. And we'll also look at working with images, because there's that phrase that a picture tells 1,000 words, but sometimes we can bring a picture in and it can really help understand what's going on with the data, with the people, with the research itself. So the objectives of today, just to introduce you to NVivo, and I'm going to be focusing on the features to help you start working with the software. By that, I mean, kind of the core of any project. So bringing data in, working with that data, looking at how you can see it, what you can do with it inside your NVivo project. And then, of course, coding it. So really going in, doing the coding, doing the memoing, in the core elements of however good you get in NVivo. I've used NVivo now for coming up to 20 years. And even today, when I go into a project, I start off, I bring in my data, I read it, I think about it, I code it, I write memos about it. Some of the other tools are fantastic and very helpful, and a lot of them are based on how well you do that first step. So we're going to be focusing on that together. For the last section, I'm then going to do some demonstrations of some of the other tools that you can do beyond the initial coding and the memoing. You don't have to do anything else. You can do amazing projects just with the coding, but there's also other options Invivo does offer you. And one of the things to always consider whenever you're going into Invivo is, of course, what is your research? What is it that you're working with? So some of the considerations coming into Invivo, for those of you thinking about working with it or currently working with it, are what type of data have you got? Not just the type, is it video or audio, but are they interviews? Are they focus groups? What type of things? Because you can organize your data really easily, really quickly, which can help so much in getting to all this amazing data that you can collect and bring together as part of a qualitative project. You can also capture longitudinal aspects of a project, so if that's appropriate. And also things to consider are, where does your data come from? Because we won't be focusing on this on too much today, but as an overall view of Invivo, you can capture demographic and characteristic data. So bringing that in that you can then use to filter through your coding and your analysis. And maybe the most important thing to think about when you're starting off, what is your methodology? What is your framework? How are you going to be working with this data that you have in there? Because Invivo is only as good as the researcher going in with it. So it doesn't do it for us. It's still up to us to do the analysis, to do the thinking, to think about what are people really saying? What's going on here? Let's really go in and find out what's happening. So I'm going to be working today with the latest version of Invivo, which was released in March last year. And I'm now going to go over and I'm going to open it up. So you may or may not have seen it, but this is what the newest version of Invivo looks like. I can go in and I can create a brand new project. So if I just go to new project, I click on that. And give it a name. So you just give it a name, and then I'm going to leave the default options as they are for now, and just ask Invivo to create my project. Actually, I'm just going to back and change the name in just a moment. Conference project, 21st of January. There we go. We don't need the tour, but it will take you through. If you're new to Invivo and you want to have a look, there is a tour that can give you a bit of a guidance about what the different areas are for. But today, I'm just going to work with this. Can everyone see this? Sharing okay? So we're going to look primarily at the different types of data. So you can bring in different data for different reasons. Sometimes you might want to bring in data for triangulation, just to see what the different aspects, what do they look like? How can I bring it in? How can I get an even deeper picture of what's happening? And I may want to separate out my data into different places. So I might have some interviews I want to bring in. I might also have some background data, maybe some reports. I might have some background information. So to create these folders, I'm simply coming to the files folder and right-clicking. So the easiest way to work with Invivo is to remember to right-click. And if you remember nothing else than what we're talking about today, but the fact you can right-click, that will get you to about 90–95% of what Invivo has. So you're just treating it like it's a Windows program. If you ever get stuck, it's not a Windows program, but it works like one sometimes. It's built along Windows guidelines. So if you ever get stuck, just have a go. Just play, just practice, see, try right-clicking. So if I right-click on files here, I've just been going to new folder, and it will let me create those folders. To now bring the data into the folders, if I click on the interviews, for instance, it will open it up again, just like it does with Windows. And I can now bring data directly into this. So if I right-click, I can choose import items. and I can choose. I can, of course, bring in text data. And in this data set, I have, this is just the sample data that comes with one of the NVivo projects. I can choose some Word documents and I can select more than one. If you hold down your control key and just click on the files you're interested in, I can bring in a mixture. So I can bring Word documents. I can bring in this file here, Helen. Helen is an audio file. I can bring in the file here, Ken. Ken is a video. There's still interviews. There's still interviews with people that I want to include and I want to work with. So the data that NVivo will offer you to import, if I come down to the bottom right-hand corner here and just click here, do you see there is a list of all the different data types that you can work with in NVivo? So different documents, PDFs, audios, videos, images, and outlooks. It doesn't include surveys or social media. They can be brought in, but they're used in a slightly different way. But any of these data types you can bring in all together. So I can select all these files, then I click open, and I click import. It's taking a little while because it is bringing in quite large files. One of the things when you're working with audio and video to be aware of is that because they tend to be large files, most of the time NVivo will leave them outside and link back to them, create a file path to go get them. It stops the projects getting really, really big. They work as though they're inside the project as long as it can access the file that's outside. So here we have Word documents, we have the audio, we have the video, we have some more text documents down here. If I want to bring in some other information as well, so I can bring in text, I can bring in audio, I can bring in video. Let's say I've got some background information and just when I'm starting off my project, I just want to bring in all the data I've got. I can add more later, but I might for now just want to bring in what I've got right here, right now. So if I come into this background information folder, just click on it and I right click and I go back to import items. Into this folder, I am going to put a couple of PDFs or some PDFs and a couple of pictures. So you can see on the type over here that I'm selecting PDFs and I'm selecting some JPEGs. So I can bring in all these different, so if you're doing something like, I did ethnography back in the day, and sometimes pictures are so helpful to bring in. And they could be pictures, they could be photos. That's what these are. But this is the data format that NVivo is interested in. So it could be something, was doing a workshop earlier and someone was saying, can I just take a photo of something I've written by hand? Of course, you can take pictures of anything. You can scan your data in that might come in as a PDF. So you have lots of different options for capturing all those different data to really collect everything together that can help bring things into your project. So I'm going to select these items and I'm just using my control key again to select multiple. I'm going to click open. And again, I'm going to click import. So the way you import one thing is the way you import everything. It's the same process. And NVivo is very good at mirroring through the different elements. So I've now got a variety of data in my project. If I want to have a look at some of these while I'm here, I will have an open, I can see a PDF here. Goes a bit slower when it's attached to Zoom, but here is the PDF, so I can bring my PDF in and I can work with that as I need to. So if you're working with documents or literature, bring as many PDFs in as you like. If I have a look at the picture here, so here is my picture. I just want to, I can't actually get to the top, the Zoom controls are in the way. Oh goodness. I'm just having a slight challenge with trying to make things visible on my screen. I'll be with you in a minute. All right, so here we have an option for the picture. If I come into the interviews, I can open up my audio file. And I can open up my video file. So you can open all of them at the same time. You've just got tabs here, and you can move between them as you need to. If I come into my video file here, I can see over here, here's Ken, here's my video. He's come in and I can play it. I can listen to it as I need to. So if I want to listen to any recording, same process. I have the timeline across here. It's got the waveform behind it, which shows me how loud the sound is. If I come above the timeline and I right click, I have the option to play this.
What are your favorite places?
So I can listen to my recording.
That's their own recording. That's where I always grew up.
Think about what they're saying.
That's where I live at.
So you can really associate
I've been here all my life. So.
What they're saying and how they're saying it. Because of course, when people say something, if they pause before they say it, or if they use a different tone of voice, you might get a real sense of what's happening here. If they say something that's sarcastic, it completely changes the meaning. So really take a moment to think about if you're doing any recordings, any interviews or focus groups or just recordings of anything, rather than rushing straight into just doing the transcription and using that, think about bringing in the video or the audio recording. And the good thing about it is it's not a choice that it's either or. You can actually work with both. So what I can do, can you see this area on the right-hand side here? This space down here is known as the video transcript. And if I go into edit mode here, do you see this little edit option up the top? If I go into edit mode, InVivo will let me add things into this transcript area. So I can come over here and I can just type in any notes I would like to make about my video. I can add in as many notes as I like, and I can add in as much text as I like into each of these rows. So I could create another row down here. And you just click into these gray rows, you start typing, and InVivo creates the row for you. I'm just going to switch off the waveform because I'm going to do some work in a moment with the actual recording. And if I come to the video ribbon, a lot of things you can get to by right click. A few things you do need to look at, go to for the ribbon. So if I go to the video ribbon here, do you see there is an option that says waveform with a little tick? That means the waveform is currently visible. If I click the tick, the waveform will disappear. So it's just an option that I can switch it on and switch it off. So if you're going to have a go working with recordings, it's quite useful to know that that's able to be brought into view and turned off again. So here I'm listening to my recording. I've got some notes over here. If I would like, let's say I'm playing this. I'm playing my video.
I mean,
and you this area, this particular spot in particular?
Ken said something that I want to capture. I want to make sure I have that in my notes. I could just go over to my right-hand side here and I could just add in another row like I did just now. Or I could decide, actually, what I'd love to do is attach the note to the section of the video itself. So if I come to the video, if you click and drag along the video, you select a section of the recording. Do you see that section there? If I put the cursor inside here and I right click, InVivo will offer me the option of inserting a new row and attaching the row to the recording. So I've got my notes here where I can type as much as I like. I can do this for as many different sections as I choose to. If I would like to find out which bit of video one of these rows is attached to, I could just go exploring. I could see, okay, I've written down what Ken was talking about. It's between 20 to 26.8. I could go find that. But Invivo makes it easier for you. So it makes it easier for you to go from your transcript to the section of recording. So if I click on the row, watch what happens. A pink stripe appears underneath the timeline. So it shows me that that's the section of the recording that is attached to that bit of text. It will show me the section. And if I go a step further, it will play it.
Particular spot in particular.
Yeah,
So you have a direct
It's a nice spot. It's easy. It's
between
easy to
Like
see.
they got category
text and the actual recording. So you've got a really easy way, even if you decide when you're coding that you want to code the text because it's easier to read than it is to listen, of the recording that the note is about. Does this make sense? Yeah? So the different ways of putting in this transcript on the right-hand side. So you can type it in like I have. If you have a Word document which you've already transcribed, so if those of you working with Invivo already, or those of you working with your data already, if you have the transcript, if that's already done, you can bring that in and ask Invivo to put it on the right-hand side here. So it will come in, and if you have the time spans in your transcript, they will come into Invivo over here. Okay, so you can bring that in, you don't have to retype it. If you don't yet have a transcript and you still want to have a go with the text, there is an automatic transcription service that you can work with Invivo. There is an extra cost to it. It's a module that you can subscribe to, but it's a quick way of getting a transcript of your recordings and importing it directly into Invivo. And it will format it in a way that will come very easily into your Invivo project. So if you right click and go to the option transcription, it will take you out to the portal and you will be able to add some minutes to it. I'll see if it will, just for time, sometimes it take a moment to log in. I might have made a mistake in trying to get this to work. I think just for time, I'm just very conscious that we don't have very much time this afternoon. So if you would like to have a go with that, it's actually a very good service because it will transcribe it. It will show the transcript to you. You will be able to edit it if you need to. Actually, it's come in now. So let me. So can you see this here? It's got the transcription option. It's uploading the file. It will then allow me to transcribe it if I would like to. So you can do the automatic transcription. You can do the transcription yourself outside Invivo or do it inside the project as well. So it's different ways of getting to the same place. But the core element here is that your recording is here. Your recording is here that you can listen to and think about and make notes about and really understand what's going on in this interview. The exact same process works for your audio files. So here I can add in some notes underneath if I'm listening to my audio file. So anything we work with the video, the exact same thing works with the audio. So you can bring in your recordings and work with them. You can import or add your transcripts and work with them. With your pictures, if you want to add those in, you can just work with the image directly, or you can also add notes about your image as well. So if you want to add in some extra depth here, so you want to say, okay, I've got lots of notes here. . This was exactly the same process as adding in notes next to your audio or your video. I can add a note about the whole picture, or I could add a note about a section of the picture. And if you want to do that, again, the process mirrors how you work with the audio and the video. You come to the media, you select the data. So I clicked and dragged and I selected that section that you can see here. If you then right click inside that section and go to the option that's hidden right now because of the Zoom, insert row, and it will do the same as it did before. It will create a new row, which you can just type into. Oops. Okay, so you can add in extra data, add in your notes. If you want to, you can attach these notes, and Invivo will then highlight for you. If I just click on this row, it highlights that section of the image that I selected that I wanted to make the note about. So you can always see the relevant section that is attached to the row, as long as you've attached it in the first place. Okay. Does anybody have any questions at this stage? Is this making sense?
Fiona, there's a question in the chat.
Invivo does, Victoria, in answer to your question, doesn't do every single language, but it does a large number of languages. When you access the transcription service, then it will give you the options, and you have 15 minutes free for the automatic Invivo transcription service. So I would suggest give it a go, see how well it works for your language. So I don't know exactly the number. I usually go on there to check, but see if it works. You then do get a chance to verify it and check it and make sure it's accurate. And as you say, yeah, just because Invivo is doing the transcription, definitely, you do need to make sure that it is verified and checked before using it. So you can use it to do the transcription. You can then take it out as a Word document, and then you can get it verified, and then you know you can use it. And if any changes need to be made to it, you can then make those changes inside your project. So I'm hoping that answers those questions. Okay, so there's one more question just coming in. All right, so have a go with it with your data. Try and see, think about how you might include these different types of data for your particular project. And I just want to have a look at now how you code this. So we can code text. So the text, just in case anyone hasn't seen Invivo at all, just show you what the text looks like in Invivo. So text just looks like text. It's a Word document. And when we come to code, we can code as much of this data as we like. So you can code your text, you can code PDFs, you can code images, you can code videos, you can code audios. The coding process is the same. So coding in Invivo, this is in the new version, we have a thing called codes. If you used earlier versions, it was called nodes, but they're the same thing. So here, I can come up here in the codes area. Just get it started. You can decide based on your project what you put in here. You can decide whether you put codes in early on. Sometimes you might come into a project and you have a coding structure that you want to capture in your project already. In which case you can come straight in, come into the codes area. If I want to capture a theme or a topic or an issue, if I'm looking at any data, I can easily do that. But whether I do it, create a code before I start, whether I create codes as I read through the data, or both, often it's both. The way I create a code in Invivo is exactly the same. You'll see it as completely empty. We need to put things in here based on what we find in the data. If I right click in this codes area, I have the option to create a new code. And that's the way I'm going to create codes throughout my entire project. There are other ways of doing it as well, but especially if you're starting off with in vivo, keep consistent, and often the easiest thing is I keep with a right click. It's a very easy way of finding your way, of working your way around in vivo. So I'm going to right click and do new code when I've decided what I want to create a code about. So using this data as an example, if I just come in to this text data for a minute, only because I know a little bit about what she talks about. So this sample data is talking to people about the environmental changes they've seen in their region. That's what the data's about. And one of these topics that this person, Margaret, says, some of the activities she likes to do, she likes to go clamming and likes to go outside, be outside in nature and go looking for clams. That's the shellfish. So I might decide that would be a really good thing to capture. If I was analyzing this data, I would want to capture this as a theme, as a topic. So up in the codes, I right click, I choose the option new code, and I give my code a name. So I decide the theme I want to capture is going to be called planning. So here is my first code, ready to have data put in it. At the moment, it's empty. It's 0 and 0. What I can do, though, is quickly put data in it. You don't have to. NVivo doesn't mind if a code stays empty, but you can put it in there if you would like to. So I'm going to select this data, and easy way to code, I just click on it. I'm going to drag it up, and I'm going to drop it in. So I always start with drag and drop because it's my favorite way of coding. It's just so simple. But if you don't like drag and drop, if you're not a fan, if you haven't got a mouse pad that works very well, and because I told you, I was mentioning that right clicking is a really good way of working with NVivo, there is also a right click option. So I can drag and drop it, or if I could do exactly the same thing, if I selected the data, right click on it, and then if I go up to the option code selection, that then says, okay, that's the node I want to code I want to put in it. I select it, and I could click on code selection. So it does exactly the same thing. Now, I've actually just coded the same piece of data with the same code twice. And I'm quite comfortable doing that because I wanted to show you both ways of coding. But the reason it doesn't matter is that NVivo will never double up. It will never give you the same piece of data twice in the same code. So it doesn't matter if I code that piece of data 10 times, it will still only appear once. If I code a little bit more data the second time, it will add the extra data onto what I coded the first time. So you have a lot of flexibility when you're coding using NVivo. So what I might do is I might come back down and see what Margaret talks about next. So the next few sentences, she starts talking about a different activity. She starts talking about fishing. So I might capture that. So I might come to my codes again, right click, choose new code, and I'm going to call this one fishing. And I click OK. So there is my code for fishing. And now I can code my data for the sections that I've just found. I can code those into my code fishing. Make sense? And you just keep going through. So as you find new themes, you create new codes. If you find data that's about themes that have got a code already, so for instance, these last few sentences, she's talking about fishermen, and fishermen go fishing. So maybe I might want to code what she's saying here about fishing. So I can click on that, drag it up, and I can put that in the fishing code as well. So now I can see the fishing code has got two references, two chunks of data. I might decide that actually what the sentences I've got here, yes, it's about fishing, but it's a bit more specific. It's about fishermen, people who fish, men who fish. So it might make sense to create another code for fishermen specifically. Now, when you're coding, you can keep creating new codes on the same level, and you can have hundreds, or I've actually had people with thousands of codes all in one long list. You can then sort them out, but you can just do them in one long list and then organize them later. Or you can organize them as you go through. It's whatever works for you and your methodology. There's no rules around it. So if I decided I wanted to create a code for fishermen, and instead of putting it on the same level, I wanted to put it underneath fishing, because it's an aspect of fishing. Yeah. If I right click on fishing, I have the option to create a new code. This time, because I was clicking on fishing when I went to new code, it will attach it underneath. So now I have the new node, new code fisherman underneath the existing code fishing. And I can now code to this code in exactly the same way as I put my data into fishing. And you can put the same piece of data into as many codes as you like. I could code this piece of data to 10 different codes. I could code it as many times as I like, whenever I like. So you can keep adding to your codes. At some point, I might want to have a look to see what have I got? What's the data coming up with at the moment about this concept of fishing, about this idea? So to open up anything in Vivo, whether it's a file, whether it's a code, you can double click on it, or you can right click on it and choose the option open. Everything opens up in this area that I've got down the bottom. Sometimes it appears on the right. I've set mine to be down the bottom. So it shows you the contents. So here I can see the exact data I've coded. I can also see the file it comes from, really helpful, because sometimes I used to do coding, as I mentioned, on paper. And when you do paper coding, I sometimes forgot to put who said what on the back of the bit of paper. So I'd come up with this great quote, and I had no idea who said it. That would cause a few trouble. In NVivo, it will always tell you who says each section, which file it comes from. It's just the way it works. So you don't need to try and remember where each section comes from. The other thing it will do, it will not only tell you where the data comes from, but it will give you context. Because if you've done any kind of research, qualitative research analysis in the past, you may well have found the same thing that I found, that as you're coding, you code a bit of data that makes complete sense when you code it. But you come back to it and you look at this sentence and you kind of go, what were they talking about? Or what was the question? Or what was happening when they said this? What is the context? So often we have to question, how much should I code? Should I code a small bit? Should I code a big bit? What should I code? And in the past, that was a really important consideration. In NVivo, it doesn't matter. Code as much as makes sense. If I want to see some context, all I need to do, I can ask NVivo if I right click and go to open referenced file, it will take me back to the interview. It will show me in the interview by highlighting the sections of data that I've coded. And I can see the question, I can see the context. So I can easily see what's going on. I can code some more if I wanted to. I can add more data to that code very quickly. So you can see context, you can add coding. You can also, if you're looking at the coding you've got, code it to somewhere else. So let's say I'm looking at all this data about fishing. And she starts talking about a specific aspect of fishing. She starts talking here about commercial fishing. So I go, that would be useful. I might want to capture a new code about this theme of commercial fishing. And what I can do, I can create a code in exactly the same way as I created codes before. Just right click on fishing. And I can capture this as commercial fishing. I can get to my data. Doesn't matter that I'm looking at it in a code rather than in a file. It makes no difference whatsoever. I can select the data. I can drag it up and I can drop it in. So you can code from one code to another, just the same way as you code from a file to a code. It gives you a huge amount of flexibility. What I've got now is the same piece of data in both. So if I open commercial fishing, I will see that same sentence is in commercial fishing. Also see that in Vivo is telling me that this data comes from Margaret. So it gives me the file it comes from. It doesn't say it was in the fishing code and then came here. It says this data comes from Margaret. So you always have reference to the original data. Very, very powerful. Great way to say to go back and check, what have I got? Is this context real? Is this actually supposed to be here? Is what I think it means, is that what the person meant? So you can go back, see what they've said. And this goes for the videos and audios as well as text. I use text because it's what we're most familiar with. So just to get the concept, but all of these things I'm showing you, you can do exactly the same with recordings. So I've got that sentence now in commercial fishing. It's also in fishing. If I want to take it out of fishing, I can uncode. So you can put data into codes. You can also take it back out. So if I select a section and I right click on it, still right clicking. So coding puts data into codes. Uncoding takes data out of codes. So if I go uncode from this code, it disappears. So a lot of flexibility, data you can put in, data you can take out. Then as you're going through, you're creating more codes. When you're working with NVivo, be very careful you don't get caught in what we call the coding trap. For those of you who have coded using other methods, when you come to code with NVivo, it's usually so much easier that it's very easy to just keep coding and coding and coding and coding and doing more and more codes and more coding. And of course, that's an important part of the process, but it's not the only part of the process. So what I suggest is when you're getting into this coding process, by all means, get into the data, start doing some coding, code maybe 2 or 3 files, and then take a moment and stop. Take a step back and look at 2 things. Firstly, have a look at the coding itself. So think about the themes, look at what you've got in the data, in the codes about the different themes. What have they said about fishing? What does this data tell me in relation to my research question about what's important? What should I write about? In NVivo, I'm hoping those of you who've worked with NVivo already have found this already, but in case you haven't, and to people who haven't seen NVivo yet, there is a very important area called Memos. It's in the notes section on the left-hand side here. Now, Memos, if I click on Memos, Memos are like the NVivo equivalent of a notebook. So back in the day when I used pen and paper, I had a notebook and I would have pages in my notebook, one for each theme. And I used to capture my thinking about the theme in that notebook. I might use a Word document. In Vivo, you use a memo because what you're wanting to do as you go through is capture your thinking about the themes. Don't get stuck in coding, because I've had a lot of people come to me and they've done all their coding and then they go, what do I do now? My first question is, have you written any memos? Have you done the thinking? Have you written your ideas and your insights and your discussions and your interpretations about the data, as well as collecting it together? So I have a memo where I can make my notes about phishing. So my memo is my discussion of the data that I'm collecting in the code. Does that make sense? So your code is collecting together everything some people say about a thing. When you read what they say, you then write about that in your memos. Your memos form the basis of your report or your thesis, because that's how we write up qualitative research. We write our discussions about the topics with a few examples of quotes for sure, but the majority is our discussion, our interpretation, and what we found by looking at that data. So create your memos. Make sure you do. If we work together on your projects at all, I'm going to be checking this. So make sure you've got your memos. Make sure you're adding your notes and your thinking as you go through. You're going to make your life so much easier. So we have memos. Read the coding, think about it, update the memos. The other thing, as you're taking this moment and stepping back to look at, is the codes themselves. Because I might say, okay, this is kind of making sense, but maybe I want to rearrange them. I want to group them in different ways. So I could say, okay, I'm going to put fishing and clamming. I'm going to group them together under a new code called water activities. So I just created a new code exactly like we created the codes before. And I'm going to move clamming and fishing very easily, use my control key, hold it down, allows me to select both. I then right click, again, I cut. I want to put them under water activities. So I go to water activities, I right click and I go paste. Okay. So I've now grouped my fishing and clamming codes together under a top code called water activities. So you have lots of flexibility in your coding. You have lots of flexibility in your codes. You can rearrange them as much as you like, whenever you like. If you need to, it's qualitative research, it will change. You will add new ones, you will create, move them around, you will maybe combine some together. Lots of options working in the project. So we've been focusing on text to get you to see how the core ideas about the codes. I now want to show you, how do you include that other data we talked about? So how do you code data like, let's actually start off with the recording. Let's go to Ken. So this was the video, yeah? This is my video recording. As we looked at, we heard Ken talk, we've got the recording, and we have the text notes next to it. Now I can code the recording itself. So this is a possibility. You can actually bring in a recording and work directly with, sorry, I'm just checking the question here. You can work directly with a recording, or you can work with the text. If I'm wanting to code the recording, if I'm listening,
Particular spot in particular?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a nice spot.
and let's say
It's easy
Ken
to-
just says something
easy to
about
see.
So got category
So I go,
access.
okay, I want to code this. So I'm going to just move the playhead out of the way so you can see. And I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before. I'm going to select the section. I've got the selected area here. I'm then going to code that into my node. So I don't actually have to transcribe at all. This is good news. Because sometimes transcription can take a while. There's much quicker ways and cheaper ways of doing it now than there ever used to be. But if you want to work directly with the recording, you don't even have to think about the transcript. And you are keeping that much closer to that data because you're listening just to how they're saying and what they're saying all the way through. And the same principles work for coding the recording as they do for coding the text. I can code the same piece of data to as many codes as I like. I can code as many pieces of data as I like. So I can code the different sections up to the fishing node. I can code them anywhere else as well. I do have the option of coding the rows of coding the text, either code the whole row, or I can just code the text. It doesn't make any difference. I can just code that. Select it, drag it up and drop it in. So the methods of coding are the same, but the way you code anything in Vivo is the same. What does change is how you select the data depending on the data type. So with text, Word document or PDF if it has text and so on. If you code the recording, you go to your timeline and you select that and then you code it from there. So you start seeing the mirroring as it goes through. One of the main things to know about coding a recording is that if you code the media, it is only the media that gets coded. If you code the transcript, it is only the transcript that gets coded. It doesn't matter if I code a row, if I code this, and I think that because I coded the row, and the row tells me the time span, it doesn't matter that I might think that Vivo should code that. It still doesn't do it. So it will only code the media if you code the media. It will only code the transcript if that's what you code. Let's put that. So you have options. If I now come to my code, and I have a look and I see what I've got in my node, I can see here that I have Margaret's data from before, and now I have data from Ken. So it does the same process. It shows me the name of the file, it shows me this data comes from Ken. It gives me sections. These are the time spans of the sections of the recording that I coded. This is the note from the transcript. These sections, I could go back to Ken and I could have a look at it and I could see those sections. But NVivo will also show me. If I come to the right-hand side here, I go to the tab video. Here is the coding from Ken. So it's all part of the same code. Just go to the tabs on the right and it will allow you to see the coding from those types of data. I haven't got an audio tab because I haven't coded from audio. If I did, I would get an audio tab. But if you see here, what you've got is Ken, you've got the time span, and you've got two white sections. Those two white sections are the bits I coded. If I want to play these, if I right-click above the timeline, just like we did before to code the whole video, if I right-click and go to play or pause, they're going to jump.
Right, so you got
plays the
to
first
get
section.
access to the water and luckily because passed out.
It jumps
Well, every
and plays the
person that
second
comes them off and builds next to.
So I can listen to the first section where he talks about fishing, followed by the second section where he talks about fishing. Just like we're used to seeing one passage followed by, but with the added bonus that we get how he says it, and it's a video, we get to see his body language. So you can really work in depth with those video files. If I look on the right-hand side here, here are the notes that I made in the transcript that I coded. You'll notice that 20 to 26, so there's 20, that's gray. It hasn't been coded. But if I click on the row, I still have, let me just see if I can get to the ribbon. If I take off the waveform, can you see the pink stripe? So I still have that capability that NVivo will show me the section of the recording that's attached to the row that I have coded. So you can code the media, you can code the transcript, and you still have that slight connection between the transcript and the recording if the time span is included. So you can work with video this way. You can also do exactly the same with audio. You can also do the same with images. So if I just come back to that, if I come to the image, and you can probably figure out how this works because it mirrors itself again. So if I would like to code an image, and again, this happens to be a photo, but it could be something that you've made notes about that you want to just take a picture of. It could be anything that you've got, drawings people have made that you've made pictures of, something you've scanned, any of those kind of things that's in an image format shows up this way. So if I select the data I want to code and I drag and drop it, just like I did before, I can code the row. Select it, either the words or the whole row, and it's exactly the same. Drag and drop it, we'll code it. So I can add all the different types of data together in the same code. So I get an overall view of everything that's going on. If I come back to my code fishing again, so I've now got the coding. I've got the coding from Ken, I've got the coding from Margaret. It's now included the coding from my picture. And the way it shows this, the note, it shows in text. The picture, even less helpful than a time span from a recording. These are the pixel coordinates. But it doesn't matter that it's very, I can't really work out what that data is. If I head over to the right-hand side, there is a tab that says picture. So this has appeared now because I've coded picture. It wasn't here before. If I click on that tab, there is my picture. I can see in color that section I coded. I can see over here on the right, the note I coded. And if I click on the note, I can see it's still highlighting the corresponding section of the image. It hasn't coded it, but it still highlights it. So I can still see which bit of the image that note is being made about. Is this okay? Everyone happy? I know there's some questions in the chat. I'll come back to those in just a moment when we finish this section. So you can code these different types of data together. And the last type of data that I did bring in just to cover those was the PDF. And PDFs can have two forms, I'm sure you know. So you can have a PDF that has character recognition, which means it works like text. You can copy it and work that way. You can also have PDFs that don't have character recognition that work as an image. You can have PDFs, again, that have both. So for instance, this PDF is text and it has an image. Now, I can't tell looking at it whether this text is character recognized or not. I can find out very quickly. If I try to treat it like text, and it either lets me, it means it has character recognition. So this does. So here I can see, I can now select that piece of PDF. I can code it just as I coded text. And I can keep going through just as I did with the text document. I can also, PDFs work in two ways. So they have both options in NViva. So I can code it as text and I can code it as an image. So if I come in, I'm just going to move it slow. So if I right click and go down to the option that says selection mode, just right click and choose region. Now I can select, if my text I wasn't able to select it as text, I can now select it as a region, as you would with an image. And that can be coded. The Zoom bar is stopping me. So I can select this section and take it up and code it to phishing. I can also code any pictures or graphics. So if you want to bring in the detail of graphics or pictures inside a PDF, this is the way you can do that. So if I come to my little book, same way as you select the image. So again, it's mirroring the way it works. I can select my little bird and I can drag that up and I can put that into my code for phishing. So you're bringing all these types of data together to get an overall picture, a really deep, rich picture of what's happening about phishing in all these different types. And back in my code for phishing, I then have the data here from my PDF. This is the data that I coded as text. Looks like text. So if you have PDFs as text, it's often the easiest way to work with them. But if you don't, if they're images or if there are images in them, this is the way it shows the coding. Not helpful. But we now know there are tabs on the right which show data in their original form, and the same works with the PDF. So if I click on this tab on the right that says PDF, here is my PDF. I can bring this up a bit. So there's the PDF. The whole thing shows, but most of it's gray. But I can see here, here's my bird with his orange legs, looking colorful. So he's been coded. Then as I come down, I can see this is the section I coded as text. Then I can come down and I can see the section I coded as a region. So I come here to read what the PDF has to say about phishing. I think about it. I go back to my memo. I update my memo with my new insights, with my new thoughts for the PDF. So this node, this code, has got all those different types of data together. So it's easy to bring it all together and just get different angles, increase that depth, increase that richness of your understanding. The reference tab is the first one that opens up. This is this one we've been looking at. This has everything in it. And the way it orders things, I don't know if you've noticed how it's been ordering the data, but it's ordered it by folder and by file. And this is good to know about in Viva, especially if you're going to start bringing in lots of different types of data. If you put them in folders, the way they're grouped in folders is the way the coding will be grouped in your code information. So that's where it's going first. It goes to my background information folder. And then it orders the data in the code in the order it finds it in the folder, which is alphabetical. So it shows all the coding from background information. When it's finished showing me all of that, it moves to the next folder, which is the interviews. And it will group all that together. So that's how it works. It will always group the coding by the folders that are in the project. If you change the folders, it will automatically update in the codes. So does that give an idea about coding and working with those different types of data? I'm just going to go to the chat because I know there's been a few questions on there. Let me just quickly see. So question about the child codes. The reason I didn't aggregate the question talking about when you have codes underneath other codes, they're known as child codes. So fisherman is known as a child, and parent has become a fish, and fishing has become a parent, excuse me. And water activities, I guess, is a grandparent. So you might have noticed when I created the water activities code that there is no coding in it. And the reason is, NVivo does not automatically put the coding in the parent that's in the child. And the reason it doesn't is because you may want to code something to the parent that doesn't belong in the child. So it's much easier to see what you coded just to the parent code if there's nothing else in there. You do have the option, this was the option that Rita mentioned in the chat, that I can go to water activities and I can do what's known as aggregation. I can aggregate water activities, which simply means show the code. I sometimes do this, it depends on what I'm looking at with my analysis. As I'm starting off doing it, I don't tend to, because I may find I want to code something just to the parent. And even though aggregation can be switched on and off, I just find it easier not to do it until I have a good reason for putting it on. So although you can, it's simply a choice. You can put it on, you can then turn it back off again if you don't want to. I often put it on when I'm starting to do things like queries. So I'm wanting to look at that broader theme, or if I specifically want to look at things broader. Does that answer? Okay. So I've answered a question already, that's good. So I'm just trying to scan through. I wish I don't know if you guys could unmute yourselves and talk. It's much easier when you guys can talk. I mean, the way there's a question about using Aviva to analyze the non-verbals. So how you analyze data is completely up to you. So how you create, the reason it's called codes, it's very broad. You can use, or codes in some methodologies has a specific purpose. But as far as Aviva is concerned, it can be whatever you want it to be. So if you're wanting to, if you're listening to audios and videos and you're wanting to group together where people talk in a specific tone, you just create a code for that specific tone of voice and you code that. Or if you notice that the tone, the way somebody's saying things affects the meaning, I would write it in the memo. That's why memos are so important, because it's your interpretation, your discussion of what it is that you're seeing and you're finding in the data. So to me, that is probably where tone of voice might go for me. But you can also say create codes about capturing together what people have said in different tones. You might create specific ways of anything, to be honest, grouping together data in whichever way suits you, whether it's thematic, whether it's tone of voice, whether it's observational, whether it's descriptive, whatever it is, use that codes area. And sometimes it's playing around with it. So the mechanics of how you code are just what we've looked at. Select the data and put it in there. Why you code is completely dependent on your project, your data, your methodology, how much time you've got, and all those kind of things. So I know some people are going to be listening to the recording of this, so I'm hoping that that helps answer that question. Just checking some of the others. You can't see, there's a question, Raoul, you can't see, Raoul, the text from one document and a segment of image on the same screen if they're in the same code. I'm afraid no. Because the way Aviva displays it, the sort of technicalities of showing a bit of image are different from how it shows the text, they have to be on separate screens. As you say, you can only see the coordinates of the image in the code list. That's kind of how, that's the only way it can show bits of image in that main reference list, is by giving it those numbers. So I'm afraid there isn't an easy way to do that. You're going to have to move between those tabs to see the image. What you do get is if you go to the picture tab, you have got the text next to it there, but that's still part of the same file. So if it's part of the same file, you can do that, but you can't see text from one document and an image from a different file at the same time. I mean, you can undock things and move screens around, but you can't do that within the same code, I'm afraid. It's a bit limited on that. Okay, is everyone okay for now? Yvonne says it was about the image. Sorry, what was about the image? Okay, cool. All right, I've answered the question about coding, so I'm hoping that was okay. Thank you all for your questions. What I just want to do now for the last few moments is just to give you a sense of what you can do beyond coding. So what else is possible using NVivo? And I'm actually going to go in and go to a separate project. Here, let's go into that one. I'm just going to open the sample project here because it's got data in that I can then play with. At the moment, the project that I was just working with was brand new and I was adding in some coding. So here we have the sample project that comes with NVivo. Some of you may have seen this already. And I just want to show you when you've done your codes. So here we've got all the coding they've done. They've included the videos and the audios and the text. What they've also put in here are some demographics. They've captured the data from each person and they've put in some demographics. So they've been able to capture who the interviewee was with, whether she was female or male, whether female or male, and their age group. So they've been able to show, it's hidden. So it's a bit like an Excel spreadsheet. They brought that data in. We don't have time to look at how you do that today, but these are called cases and case classifications. If you want to have a look at that and explore that, if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, it's a way of capturing the demographic data from your participants or any closed-ended questions that you want or any characteristic data, what organization they work for. And it enables you to then ask questions of your themes based on any of those characteristics. So for instance, if they've got lots of coding here about, they did find comments about phishing. So I might want to say, okay, they did talk about phishing. And I might say, I wonder if people in different communities talk about phishing differently. So they've captured the community. I can come in and I can say, okay, NVivo, I would like you to go through all of the coding I've done about all the aspects of economy. So I'd like you to look at economy, agriculture, fishing, jobs, and tourism, all the coding that's been done there. And I want you to separate out what people who live in different places or members of different communities, I'll do communities. So what people who live in different communities have to say about those things. So it very quickly goes in. This is what's called a crosstab query. And it goes in and it separates out for me what people from the different communities have had to say. It also tells me how many people in total are in the project. It's separated out. And although it gives us numbers to me in NVivo are simply an indicator of something that might be worth exploring. So for instance, I can see here that quite a few people from Harkers Island talked about fishing. If I want to see what they've said, I double click and I can see this is only based on the coding. So the coding has to come first, but then you can explore the coding in different ways. So here I can see this is what people from Harkers Island have said about fishing based on the coding and based on the demographics that have been captured in the project. But it's a really powerful thing to be able to do, to really scan through your data and see what have people, different groups said. So I can ask what different people from different communities have to say, and I can actually go a step further and include gender. So what do men and women from each of the communities have to say? So here, I can see it looks like men from, I've talked to 8 men and only 2 women, so that's probably got something to do with it. So everything needs to be taken in the context of the study. If you are going to have a look at these at any point, please don't get too caught up in the numbers. It's very tempting, especially if anyone's coming from a more quantitative background, to look at the numbers and go, oh, numbers, I don't know what to do with these. But be very, very careful. These are simply counts of qualitative coding. If you haven't done any coding, the numbers won't appear. If you haven't done your coding well or thoroughly, the numbers won't make it look any better. In fact, it spreads out spreads it all out, so it's easier to see what you've got. But there are really good ways of exploring and just checking in to say, what has this group said? What has that group said? Let me read what they've said. Let me understand more about this particular group of people by asking NViva to separate out my data and really go in depth and just see what's behind this. What has this group said? Why has some group talked about this issue more than others? What have they got behind it? Is it something that they said, or is it something about them, or is it something about the questions I asked? So really ways of really interrogating and going in depth to see, what have I got? What is here that might be helpful for me to really understand about my data? So coding comes first, then this becomes possible once you've done the capture the demographics. So you can, one of the most common ways of querying data, as it's called, is by doing this, by looking at the themes, the nodes, the codes by the demographics. Another way that you can do things is that you can compare across themes. And this data has captured all of the data, whether it's video or audio coding or images, whatever is there, it will bring it back. So it's not limited to text. This is looking at everything that you coded. So I can also look at where some different themes overlap. For instance, in this project, they have captured some of the ways people have spoken about the themes that have come out. So they've captured the positive comments people have made, the negative comments people have made. They haven't put individual positive and negative comments underneath each theme. They've captured it on a broad level. So they have coded a positive comment about fishing to this positive node and to my fishing node. This is one of the ways you can work. It helps structure things in a way that's much more easy to manage because you're using a beaver. If I want to now find out the positive and negative comments people have made about fishing, I can just ask NViva to go find it. So I can go in and I can say, okay, NViva, there are some positive and negative comments and some mixed and neutral comments that I would like to explore. I would like to see what positive, negative, mixed and neutral things have come out of the themes where people have talked about agriculture, fishing, jobs and tourism. So what positive and negative things have people said about these things is effectively what I'm asking. Again, this is based on coding. If you haven't done the coding very well, this isn't going to help. But it's a fantastic way of scanning through and seeing what you've got, exploring what's underneath. And here is the result. Again, it's just going on the coding in the project. I like coloring it, it makes it easier to see. So here, looks like there's fairly more negative comments about what's happening with fishing compared to positive. I might go in and have a look. What have they said? Let me see. It could be, I need to be careful here as well, that it could just be that the way the question was asked means there's going to be more negative comments about it. So you've got to be very careful with any of this data to really think back as to what data are you working with? Where did it come from? What's behind all this? And that's what NViva is really, really good at, is giving you very broad views. So this table gives me a broad sense of what's going on. I can drill down and look at what's behind any of these. So I can see these are the negative comments, positive comments about fishing. If I want to have a look and see where this comes from, so if I'm looking at one of these and I'm reading it and thinking, how is this helping me understand my data? If I want to then see where this comes from, I have the same capability as I do with any coding anywhere. If I right click, I can go open referenced file and it will take me back to the original data. So you can always, I've yet to find anywhere in NViva that takes more than 2 clicks to get from a very broad view back to the original data to check, is this really what I'm finding? Is this if I've taken this in context or is this out of context? Is this where it's supposed to be? So really checking, going down, digging into the data, checking, is what I'm finding at this top level actually accurate? So you can check in, find out what's going on, explore your data in different ways. You can also visualize it if it's helpful, but be careful. I kind of like charts because I'm a big fan of visuals, but you've got to be careful that just because it's pretty still doesn't mean it actually means anything. This is a chart that I could then take out and include in a report if it tells me something relevant. So make sure when you're working with any of these things in NVivo that you know what it's showing you. Because if someone comes to you and says, that's really pretty, but why is it here? What's it showing? Because you are leaning towards quantification, in my mind, as you start looking at numbers, you start looking at charts. Inside the project, fantastic, it helps you work with it. Outside the project, you have really good reason for taking it out and including it. Can be helpful sometimes, but not always. As you're working with NVivo, we're getting towards the end of today. Have a look at the help. There's various options if you go to File and go to Help, if you want to explore any more that some of the things we've looked at today or some of the other elements that NVivo offers. If you would like to contact us, I'm here on behalf of Timberlake, and we have some details here for you if you would like to contact them. If you'd like any help, a session to sort of take you in more detail, we can work with you on your project. Either contact them by email or by phone. More than happy to have a chat to you about how you might use NVivo for your particular data or any specific things either that NVivo and you'd like to have a chat about. So thank you for coming along today. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you for your questions. And